If you have already watched this introductory information, you can skip ahead no more than 15 minutes. Hello, welcome. I am predicting that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of the famous music duo Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall to the ground on August 30th, 2025, and then die as a result of his injuries on September 4th, 2025. This time-stamped email proves that this prediction that Paul Simon will die on August 1st, 2025 has been known since November 9th. We can see here the timestamp November 9th, 2024. On November 8th, 2024, we received the relevant prophetic signs related to Paul Simon. And as I wrote right here, God was pointing to November 8th ahead of time because Simon's death will point to Revelation chapter 8, verse 1. And this is the reason why Paul Simon will die on August 1st, 2025. In short, the date 8:1 and 11:8 hint at Revelation 8:1 in the Bible, which describes a period of silence that was observed in heaven. Paul Simon's first hit was Sound of Silence. As I wrote right here, it is exactly 38 weeks between November 8th and August 1st, 2025, and Paul Simon is predicted to die at the age of 83, for which 38 weeks hints at. All right, the analysis that God was pointing to August 1st was 100% correct. However, Paul Simon did not die on August 1st. Instead, God provided clear and relevant signs related to Paul Simon, which revealed adding 34 days to reach September 4th. The prophetic sign we received on August 1st revealed adding 34 days to reach September 4th. There are countless other reasons for knowing that Paul Simon will die on September 4th. But the prophetic sign that we expected in advance of August 1st revealed adding 34 days to reach September 4th. The sign we received was the news report, the breaking of the news of the sale of the storied mansion in Los Angeles that was built for the most prolific TV producer in history, Aaron Spelling, and God uses extremes and records for his signs, who produced the longest-running drama series in history, Seventh Heaven. Paul Simon's most recent album is 7 Psalms, and his 7th solo album is the album Graceland, which is about a mansion. In his signs, God has been using this theme of mansions to relate to Paul Simon. This isn't the only example. For example, also, the sale of Paul Simon's mansion was a prophetic sign on July 1st, 2022. This sign right here is also the sale of a mansion. And like the sale of Simon's mansion, the price that it sold at was a prophetic sign. This sign here of Aaron Spelling's mansion sold for $110 million. Before I explain that, there is another connection that I forgot to mention between Paul Simon's Graceland Mansion album, his 7th album, and Aaron Spelling, who produced the TV series Seventh Heaven, which is that one of Simon's hit songs that was released from the Graceland album, The Boy in the Bubble, was inspired by Aaron Spelling's TV movie, The Boy in the Plastic Bubble. This mansion sold for $110 million. And this is because Paul Simon is 9/11 symbolism in God's signs. God uses firsts for prophetic signs in general. And Paul Simon opened with a performance in the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live after 9/11. Simon also performed at the 10th anniversary at the 9/11 Memorial. And Simon is known for being from New York City. That's why this mansion in this prophetic sign on August 1st, 2025 sold for $110 million. It sold for $110 million exactly 37 months after the sale of Paul Simon's mansion. 37 hints at 3 sets of 7. The Israelites were led by Joshua into the promised land and then enacted a symbolic 3 sets of 7 before the walls of security of ancient Jericho collapsed in God's judgment. Joshua died in the Bible at the age of 110. On 9/11, the Twin Towers were 110 stories before they collapsed, and then engendered a small earthquake that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street, where George Washington was inaugurated. And through the 9/11 events, God pointed to George Washington because Washington was inaugurated in Federal Hall and afterwards marched down Wall Street, as in the Israelites march around the walls of security of Jericho, into Trinity Chapel, today nicknamed the Miracle Chapel, because it was the only building that survived the falling debris at Ground Zero and survived without even a broken window, due to the 70-year-old sycamore tree that was uprooted in the process of sheltering the chapel. And today there is a 20-foot-high bronze statue of the roots of this tree to commemorate it for saving the chapel. And the reason why God pointed to this chapel that Washington went into is because inside the chapel, at the beginning, the founding of the nation, as in the foundation of Federal Hall being cracked, Washington consecrated the nation to God, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its divine protection and blessings, which it temporarily did on 9/11, when 2 planes struck the 2 towers 17 minutes apart, and the towers were again 110 stories high. 2 planes 17 minutes apart hints at 2 times 17 equals 34. On 9/11, the Dow Jones Index was closed at 9,605.51. The 9,605 hints at 9 and 6 plus 5 equals 11, and it was closed 0.34 points above the previous day's close. In other words, 34 is a 9/11 number. Paul Simon is symbolism in God's signs for 9/11. On 9/11, 110 stories collapsed, and we have this sale of this mansion that is connected to Paul Simon that sold for $110 million, 34 days before it is predicted that Paul Simon will slip and fall down, as in collapse of the towers, and then die as a result of his injuries on September 4th, 2025. It is predicted that on August 30th, Paul Simon will slip and fall, and then his injuries will lead to his death. And August 30th is 29 days after the sale of this mansion for $110 million, which, as I've now explained, hints at the 110 stories that collapsed on 9/11. And 29 is a number that God uses in order to hint at 9/11 through the use of only 2 numbers, 2 and 9, 29, which hints at 1 and 1 and 9, and therefore 9/11. One thing to add here is that Paul Simon is predicted to die as a result of falling, as a result of injuries incurred from slipping and falling. It is irrelevant the state of Paul Simon's health currently. That said, there is 0 news in the media regarding the state of Paul Simon's health. But like I said, it's irrelevant anyway, because Paul Simon is predicted to slip and fall and then die. Now, the reason for going into all of this is because it needs to be explained that in reality, or rather essentially, I predicted that Paul Simon would die on September 4th, back in November of 2024. Because again, as I explained here in this email that was written on November 9th, 2024, God was pointing to August 1st, 2025 for Paul Simon's death because of Revelation 8:1, as I explained. And I just now explained the trail of signs that led from August 1st to September 4th. And those signs were revealed through knowing August 1st ahead of time. Therefore, essentially, if you are reasonable and you have the eyes to see, I predicted that Paul Simon would die on September 4th, back in November of 2024. The reasonable person will recognize that this is true. I am predicting that on September 25th, 2025, a dirty bomb, a conventional bomb with nuclear material, will explode in New York City in Penn Station, and also a dirty bomb will explode in the port of Los Angeles. In his signs, God is clearly communicating that this event will happen. It's just a question of whether or not this will occur on September 25th. I am predicting that Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom will die in a plane crash in St. Louis as they are traveling from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles in Busch Stadium in St. Louis on August 2nd, 2028. This will be during the predicted presidential campaign of Gavin Newsom. As a result of Gavin Newsom's death, Michelle Obama will become the Democrat Party's presidential nomination. Michelle Obama will, quote unquote, win the election over J.D. Vance on November 7th, 2028, and will become the president on January 20th, 2029. Donald Trump is predicted to run as J.D. Vance's vice president. This scheme to overcome the 22nd Amendment will backfire and inspire Michelle Obama and Barack Obama to run on the ticket with Barack Obama as Michelle Obama's vice president. She will then step down and Barack Obama will become the president again. It is predicted that there will be a massive Mary apparition on the beach in Rio, Brazil on April 24th, 2029. It is now recognized that there will be 2 massive Mary apparitions on the beach in Rio. The first of the 2 is predicted to be on March 22nd, 2029. These predicted Mary apparitions will not be secretive. They will be mainstream, worldwide news. Like all Mary apparitions in history, including at Lourdes, Guadalupe, and Fatima, this Mary apparition will be a demon pretending to be Mary. It is predicted that on April 26th, 2029, the key will open the bottomless pit and fallen angels will cross over into the earthly realm. April 26th, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to the 5th trumpet judgment that is described in Revelation chapter 9, when the demonic realm collides with the earthly realm. April 26th, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to demons pretending to be aliens. The demons pretending to be aliens will claim to be here to help us with our nuclear weapons. It is predicted that Pope Francis will be resurrected from the grave on April 26th, 2029, and it is possible that on this day, Pope Francis will announce that aliens have arrived and have made him the ambassador for the world. This will immediately give Pope Francis, the Antichrist, supreme power over governments of the world. April 26th, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to a zombie pandemic and the masses becoming demonically possessed that will be facilitated through the thing, which is the mark of the Antichrist and 5G frequencies. April 26th, 2029 will be a symbolic beginning to the coming genocide politicide in America. The resurrection rapture event will occur on Pentecost on May 27th, 2029. On September 11th, 2029, there will be a catastrophic asteroid hit of Earth in the Indian Ocean. The greatest seismic effect of this will be felt on the other side of the globe, which is North America, and this will trigger an eruption of Yellowstone volcano and will cause the volcano in the Canary Islands to collapse into the Atlantic Ocean and send a mega tsunami towards the East Coast. It will also trigger the collapse of the Hoover Dam, which will cause a water panic in California, and many other devastating earthquakes. The day of the Lord, the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ, Judgment Day, will be at the end of 2031. The date that this video is posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. All right, welcome. This video will be talking about the amazing, astounding prophetic signs that occurred on August 12th. Now, the must-watch, all of the Paul Simon videos are a must-watch, of course, when the prediction comes to pass, but the famous Amos video and the Brady statue video, that's just the thumbnail. The video, all of the videos are not really their titles because the videos incorporate all kinds of signs and I have to give it a title, so I just choose something really, most of the time. Something that's relevant to that particular video. But anyway, the famous Amos video and the Tom Brady statue video explain at the beginning of those videos how the prophetic signs on August 8th and August 12th connect to the date it is predicted that Paul Simon will die on September 4th. And just briefly, because I won't explain it again, you need to watch those other videos. Probably you should be watching all of the videos in chronological order on this channel anyway. In other words, in the order that I produced them. But again, I'll just state that the two Royal Caribbean cruise ship signs pointed to the ships in Revelation 8:8. That's why one of the dates was 8:8. That was the first of the ship signs. And the reason for Revelation 8:8 is because Revelation 8 begins with a sound of silence in heaven, and Paul Simon's first hit that launched his career was Sound of Silence. Anyway, long story short, the ships in Revelation 8:8 are a parallel with the ships in Isaiah chapter 23, which describe America. There are those that say America isn't in Bible prophecy, but they are incorrect. The ships of Tarshish and the daughter of Tarshish, Tarshish in the ancient world was Great Britain. That's why it's the ships of Tarshish, because it was Great Britain's ships that gave it its power in the 19th century. And America, likewise, the daughter of Tarshish, its ships gave it its power in the 20th century. Anyway, so the ships are symbolic of America, as is Paul Simon. And long story short, the second of these Royal Caribbean cruise ship signs on August 12th revealed adding 23 days because of Isaiah chapter 23. Now, more is explained, like I said, in the other two videos regarding this. And now, enjoy this amazing video talking about in detail, which you need to watch, the details of the prophetic signs that occurred on August 12th. If you watch the other two videos, I haven't even scratched the surface. So watch this video, especially when the prediction comes to pass. The wise person will recognize every minute of every video needs to be watched. All right, welcome. This video is amazing. The profound, amazing signs on August 12th must be learned about. This will be explained in this video. What I just want to introduce this video with is to say that the signs on August 12th included another Royal Caribbean cruise ship sign, which was confirmation of the 4 days from August 8th, which was recognized at that time. That God, well, it was actually recognized prior to August 8th that God was pointing to August 8th and August 12th. In fact, at one point, it was believed that Simon would die on the 8th and that his funeral would be on the 12th. And that was the reason why God was pointing to both dates, because it was confusing as to why God was pointing to both dates from the signs that occurred on August 1st. Long story short, as explained in the other video about August 1st, the $110,000 or $110 million mansion sale and the Seventh Heaven, the mansion that was built for the TV producer of Seventh Heaven, and on, it revealed adding 7 days and also 11 days to August 1st to get August 8th and August 12th. Well, it just so happens that we had these two most profound, amazing prophetic signs that involved a Royal Caribbean Company cruise ship. So it's confirmation that God was indeed pointing to both of these dates through the signs that occurred on August 1st. The first of the two Royal Caribbean cruise ship signs, long story short, which you need to learn about in the other video, was the slip, slide, and away sign. When it was reported in the national news that slide had busted while a slider was sliding down, seriously injuring the slider on the slide on the world's biggest cruise ship. God uses extremes for signs. Incidentally, the TV producer was the most prolific TV producer in history, and he produced the longest running drama series in history, Seventh Heaven. Okay, so anyway, also that TV producer is connected to Paul Simon because he produced the TV movie The Boy in the Plastic Bubble, which inspired the song by Paul Simon, The Boy in the Bubble, on Simon's 7th album. Okay, so anyway, what we had though on August 12th, 4 days later, as was projected, but also not only from the signs on August 1st, but the Slip, Slide, and Away song was from Simon's 4th album and final solo album with Columbia Records, and Columbia is a name that God is using in his signs to symbolize America. And the song America is from Simon's 4th Simon and Garfunkel album. Anyway, that was all confirmation, what we already knew, which was to add 4 days. But it just so happens that 4 days later, we get another dramatic, amazing Royal Caribbean cruise ship sign, which I will explain in this video. It involves Diana Ross. And the reasons for Simon and Diana Ross connecting with each other, why they are parallel with each other in God's signs, is so important. It's so profound. I'm not going to start getting into it right here in this introduction, though. Just wait till you learn about this during this video. All right, welcome. This video is predicting that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon will die on August 31st, 2025. Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel. And what proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time is the post date on the social media platform that you are watching this video on, but also this email right here, which says right here that it was written 4 hours ago. But as we can see here, it was written on August 12th. All right, so the reason for this video particularly is that I will explain the prophetic signs that occurred on August 12th that are related to Paul Simon. God, ahead of time, before August 12th, overwhelmingly pointed to August 12th to be a date related to Paul Simon. It didn't end up being the date of his death. It ended up being another step in the trail of signs. That's how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. The full intended meaning of any of God's prophetic signs cannot be properly or fully understood without their connections and context with the other prophetic signs. And what will prove these things that God is communicating through these signs and connections will be proven to be true when the prediction comes to pass. And so, for example, a prediction like the death of Paul Simon doesn't appear out of the blue. The death of Paul Simon as a major prophetic sign has been recognized for years now. And years ago, God was not pointing to August 31st, as far as I'm aware. Well, I mean, I take that back. You can get the connections, but the point is that it wasn't revealed through God's prophetic signs yet that August 31st would be an important date. God had to first reveal other dates in order to build the big picture of signs. That's how it works. And so God will point ahead of time to a date, and it is often not possible to know whether it is the end of the trail or the actual event. There are far more dates that God's pointing to, or has pointed to, than there are predictions. That makes sense, right? There are many, many times more signs than there are actually predictions. And so to establish, or rather to tell the stories that God wants to tell regarding Paul Simon, and there are a lot, Paul Simon is extremely significant in many, many profound ways. That's not possible to be told without the big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. It is through the big picture of signs, patterns, and connections that God is able to tell these stories regarding Paul Simon, and therefore why it is important, or why Paul Simon is important. And again, that requires these trails of signs that connect to each other. And August 12th was one of those dates, and it wasn't, in the end, the date that he would die. It was the date, I think, it's a step in the trail. There will probably be more Paul Simon prophetic signs between August 12th and August 31st. I wouldn't be surprised at all. Now, it has been recognized since November 9th, 2024, that Paul Simon would die in the 8th month of 2025. It was first realized that God was pointing to August 1st, 8-1. And that's because of the book of Revelation, chapter 8, verse 1, that describes a period of silence that was observed in heaven. Paul Simon's first big hit that launched his career was Sound of Silence. The sound of silence in heaven precedes the 7 trumpet judgments. So Paul Simon's death, in other words, will be a warning like the sound of silence was in heaven. Paul Simon's newest album is 7 Psalms, which hints at the 7 trumpets that follow the sound of silence. And Paul Simon also has another hit, a big one that is Late in the Evening that heavily uses trumpets. And Late in the Evening in itself is a name that hints at the impending judgment that time is running out. All right, so now that we've established this background as to how God's signs works, what we have here is August 12th. And I'm going to explain the signs that occurred on August 12th and how ultimately they revealed and confirmed that Paul Simon will die on August 31st. It was realized prior to learning about these signs on August 12th that God was pointing to August 31st in regards to Paul Simon's death. Okay, that was realized in the morning of August 12th, long before the signs were recognized. Okay. So one of the stories, one of the signs is this story of 110 Russian troops breaking through Ukraine's front line. This is a big story. It's unprecedented in this particular war, from what I recall. 110,000 is the number, and that's an extremely relevant prophetic number from the Bible. For example, on 9/11, 110 stories collapsed with the Twin Towers. But that is not explaining the number 110, but the biblical 110 is the age at which Joshua died. And Joshua led the Israelites around the walls of security of Jericho before they collapsed in God's judgment. Well, this front line is a wall. It's Ukraine's front line wall that was broken, breached. As in the Bible, walls of security being breached, whether it be Jericho or Jerusalem in the Bible. So the number 110, in other words, in the Bible, is associated with the breach of walls of security. This has been recognized for years and years now in God's signs, this significance of the number 110 and its association with the wall of security because of what I just explained. And so anyway, the Russian troops broke through the Ukraine frontline wall. Now the thing is one of the ways we first recognized that August 12th was a date that God was pointing to for Paul Simon is that August 12th was 11 days after the news of the sale of the storied mansion in Los Angeles for $110 million. 110 million hinted at 11, which is why we added 11 days to August 1st to get August 12th. Okay, so in other words, like I said, back in November of 9th, 2024, I recognized August 1st, 2025 as being a date for Paul Simon. Then on that day, we received the signs, including the $110 million mansion that revealed adding 11 days. And so in other words, back in November of 2024, I recognized also August 12th. If you have the eyes to see, it's very straightforward and it's very reasonable. In fact, I believe you are unreasonable if you cannot recognize that back in November of 2024, I didn't only recognize August 1st, I recognized August 12th as well, because August 1st was correct because we received the relevant prophetic signs related to Paul Simon. Now, I won't explain it again in this video, but Paul Simon, God is using mansion symbolism signs in his signs in relation to Paul Simon. Because Simon's best-selling solo album was Graceland, and it's about a mansion, Elvis Presley's mansion. That album was Paul Simon's seventh. When Joshua, who died at the age of 110, led the Israelites around the walls of security, he did so for 7 days and then blew 7 trumpets, etc. So that's why the 7 and 110 go together here with the mansion symbolism, because of the sale of this mansion. Now also, the mansion was built originally for the most prolific TV producer in history, and God uses records for signs, Aaron Spelling, who produced the longest running drama series in history, Seventh Heaven. Okay. And also he produced the movie The Boy in the Plastic Bubble, and one of the songs, the third song released from Paul Simon's seventh album, Graceland, was Boy in the Bubble, and that was inspired by the movie The Boy in the Plastic Bubble by Aaron Spelling. Another connection between Simon and Aaron Spelling that confirmed the analysis of the 11 days like I'm talking about here. The third song from the seventh album hints at 3 sets of 7, and that's exactly what happened when Joshua, who died at 110, led the Israelites around the walls of security. They did so for once per day for 7 days, and then on the 7th day they marched around 7 times while blowing 7 trumpets. It was a symbolic 3 sets of 7. That's why God uses symbolic 3 sets of 7 in his signs, including this third song released from the 7th album. Okay, so is Simon somehow connected to the war or something? This is like, I'm writing to my friend here. And by the way, that's going to be the format of this video. I'm just going to read these thoughts rather than type out a big long article, and I'm just going to ad lib here with the thoughts that I had written down to my friend here as they came. I think it's a better strategy in this particular case. Now, or perhaps it's been concluded before. So the thing is that we already know from prior years in God's signs that the Russia-Ukraine war hints at the thing, the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing that goes into people. And incidentally, 2022 was a year for that thing when it was being enforced, etc. Being enforced. And anyway, the thing is that vaccine, the thing development was done in Ukraine. There was a lot of corruption in Ukraine. That's why the country was filled with U.S.-funded BIO, begins with a wet and then ends with a puns. Begins with a lab, ends with a Tories, oratories. Okay, and so that's not a conspiracy theory. That's fact. It's not Russian propaganda. It's fact. If you don't know that, that's because you are the one that is propagandized by the leftist, evil, wicked, lying mainstream media. That's not to say that all alternative media is true. No, of course not. And of course there are ridiculous, evil conspiracy theories as well. But that's not a conspiracy theory. That's a fact. I could give you the reasons for how to know that, even including testimony in Congress, for example. You just have been lied to by the media. Okay? Anyway, and why have you been lied to? Because the left is, the politics of the left have become the religion for the left that's replaced Christianity. And when people don't worship God anymore, they don't worship nothing, they worship anything, as I believe Chesterton said. Anyway, so the thing about this Russia-Ukraine war, first of all, another thing is that Russian hints at rush in, fools rush in. Fools rush in to take the mark of the Antichrist, which has strong ties in its development with the clandestine laboratories in Ukraine. The thing about the thing, though, and what makes it a mark, what marks people, is that it changes a person's chromosomes with snake venom. It inserts snake venom into the chromosome. Because the protruding amino acid on the CVD disease thing, round thing, you know, the thing that floats, that protruding amino acid, I'm using my words, right, carefully, is in fact snake venom. It's put onto a bat virus, but it is snake venom. And the thing uses that genetic code of snake venom. Researchers have been studying the medicinal use of snake venom for many, actually decades now. And so anyway, that's the reason why on the first day of the war, the symbolic, and God uses firsts for signs, on the symbolic first day of the war, the big story was how the Moskva, and then God used the Moskva later, and it sank on the anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic, and that's another prophetic sign. But anyway, that story on the first day was how the Moskva took Snake Island. And the infamous Ukrainians giving the finger to the sailors on the Moskva. Right? That's the first day. It's Snake Island, and it's not an accident because God is using the Russian-Ukraine war for this purpose, like I'm saying, to point to the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing that was developed in Ukraine and, of course, China, in Wuhan. Now, anyway, and I'm not going to bother giving you the connections to prove that. That was proven years ago. You can go back into the archive, or maybe I'll re-release those videos later at some point. Now, so the other sign here we received, because it's interesting, we expected, well, I should say on August 8th, we expected relevant, clear signs involving Paul Simon. And long story short, because it's explained in another video, we received this Royal Caribbean cruise ship sign in which the water slide busted, injuring seriously a passenger who was sliding down the slide. And all of that hinted at Slip Sliding Away, Paul Simon's song. Now, there's much more to that, and it's amazing, but I'm not going to explain that here. Anyway, that was August 4th, and that sign revealed adding 4 days because the album of that Slip Sliding Away is the fourth album and last album that Simon made for Columbia Records. And Columbia is a name that symbolizes America, and it was a ship, and the ships in Revelation chapter 8, verse 8 and through 9, symbolize America. And that's another long story that I've already explained in another video. Okay, but that's why we had that ship sign on the date 8-8, because the ships go back to the ships in Isaiah chapter 23, the ships of Tarshish. Anyway, I've explained it before, so I'm not going to explain it again, but for those that think that America isn't in Bible prophecy, you couldn't be more wrong. It's Isaiah chapter 23 and Revelation chapter 8. The ships are about America because Isaiah chapter 23 is about America. And the ships in Revelation chapter 8 point back to Isaiah chapter 23. And and that's the case with a lot of prophecy. In the book of Revelation, there's parallels, cross-references with the prophecies in the Old Testament. Now, so look for the other video that explains, if you're curious, how the ships of the daughter of Tarshish is America and Tarshish is the UK. Okay, now, so we had another Royal Caribbean sign just 4 days later, and this sign, the article, mentions the other sign 4 days earlier, which was the water slide breaking. This time, we had the cancellation due to quote-unquote unforeseen circumstances, Diana Ross performing on the cruise ship. Okay? All right. By the way, the first of the two signs on the cruise ships was the largest cruise ship in the world, and God uses, again, records for signs. Now, Simon's last concert at the Space Needle was 1,260 days, inclusive count, after the start of the war, of the Ukraine-Russia war. So now we're tying both of these signs together right here, because the Russia-Ukraine sign on August 12th was the 110,000 breaking through the wall, but this sign, in conjunction with the ship sign, is 1,260 days, which is an extremely prophetic number of days in the Bible, mentioned 7 times in Bible prophecy. And it alludes to, or hints at, or rather symbolizes the end period, the end of the end, the period of the Antichrist. So that's an amazing thing, because the mark of the Antichrist will be enforced by the Antichrist. And we have this number that symbolizes this period of time when the mark of the Antichrist will be enforced by the Antichrist. The space needle hints at the mark of the Antichrist because it's a needle, of course. And the space hints at transhumanism technology, which is begins with an MR and then also ends with an NA technology, because it alters and is designed to alter a person's chromosomes. And that's how they get marked, with the symbol of evil in the Bible, the snake. This 1260 days is also exactly 60 plus 60 plus 60 weeks, which is at 666, the number of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. All right. And, oh, no, I apologize, I made an error. Simon's last concert, which was at the Space Needle, was 1260 days after the Russia-Ukraine war began with Snake Island. And I explained in the other video why Paul Simon is relevant to the mark of the Antichrist. But it includes also, in this case, the date of his last concert, which was at the Space Needle. And by the way, that was also the day that RFK Jr. canceled 22 contracts for the, begins with an MR and ends with also the NA, MA thing. 22 contracts, because the number 22 in God's sign symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist. Because the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist would have been a Tav mark, and the Tav letter in the Hebrew alphabet is the 22nd and last letter of the alphabet, and the mark of the Antichrist is described in the last book of the Bible, which is the 22nd book out of 22 books in the Bible out of a total of 22 chapters. Also, the mark of the Antichrist changes the person's chromosomes, and people have chromosomes come in pairs, and each part of the chromosome has 2 arms, and so 2 and 2, 22. All right, now, let's move on here. So, let's see. Now, Diana Ross. This Diana Ross story is a sign, given that it is 4 days after the Royal Caribbean sign that revealed Simon's 4th album with Columbia. Well, and by Columbia is, of course, related to Columbus, who used ships, as in the ship of the Caribbean ship. What is God communicating through Diana Ross? Why is her cancellation without explanation? In other words, due to unforeseen circumstances. Okay, so cancellation could hint at judgment, but also Ross is equal to 81. I'm sorry, she is 81. And that's more relevant, that's relevant to Paul Simon. So this is our first initial way of connecting Diana Ross to Paul Simon, besides the fact that they are famous musicians, which in itself is probably enough to connect the two. But God doesn't settle for just that. He's very amazing and creative with his signs, including the fact that she is 81, which hints at Revelation 8:1, and that's the big thing about Paul Simon, because in Revelation 8:1 is this period of sound of silence, and Paul Simon's first hit was the sound of silence. And her not performing without an explanation is symbolic of the sound of silence. That's why she's 81. All right, now, on August 11th, the Dow closed at 44,044. This is a big number related to Paul Simon. Now, let's just explain it here once. Probably got to explain it once per video. But Paul Simon, his biggest hit was Bridge Over Troubled Water. And bridge in God's signs is the same symbolism as a door. And in the trumpet judgments that follow the period of silence in heaven, there is one of the trumpet judgments that describes how the demons will cross over a bridge into the earthly realm after the door is opened with a key. And key is what is used in music composition, and Paul Simon is known as one of the greatest popular music songwriters of history, one of the GOATs. And so the door here is symbolized by 4, because the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is the same symbol as a door, because the Hebrew letters are also symbols for things. And that word for that letter is dalat, which is where we get the word delta from, which is the 4th letter of the Greek alphabet. And that delta word is where we get in English the word door. Now, speaking of key, Paul Simon was born in 41. And the word key in simple English gematria, A = 1, B = 2, C = 3, is 41. And 41 is the 13th prime number, and Paul Simon was born on the 13th day of the month, etc. Well, anyway, so we, in other words, have this tie to the number 4 through this trumpet judgment about the door opening to the bottomless pit for the demons to cross over. Now, another reason why God is, or how God is using Paul Simon in association with the number 4 is that God is using Paul Simon to point to the book of Amos in the Bible. The agent that first signed Simon and Garfunkel, Wally Amos, the founder of famous Amos cookies, lured Simon and Garfunkel into his office through cookies and then signed them. So Wally Amos is associated with Paul Simon, and he died at the age of 88, which obviously hits at Revelation chapter 8, which begins with the period of silence in heaven. Well, Amos, as in Wally Amos, the book of Amos chapter 8 verse 1 begins with a description of a basket of summer fruit instead of a description of a sound of silence. Well, the month of August is this month when there are baskets of summer fruits, the 8th month. Now, it is through that God is also pointing through Paul Simon to the first chapter of the book of Amos, which has 15 verses, and in those verses is a repeating Hebrew idiom, which is for 3 transgressions and for 4. It's repeated a few times in that chapter, and that is an idiom that means the tolerable limit of transgression has been exceeded, and now it is unavoidable that judgment and destruction come. For 3 transgressions and for 4. And so that's why the number 4 there, because the 4 represents like, it, in the idiom, 3 represents like the completeness, and then the 4 is like exceeding it, and so therefore judgment and all that. So that's just the idiom. It's an idiom. It does not literally mean what it means, right? So, but the idiom means what I just said, and that's why God is using this. That's why also Paul Simon and Garfunkel's first album was Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. Wednesday is the 4th day of the week. That hints at 3 transgressions and for 4. And by the way, that's the album in which Sound of Silence was released. And that was released, by the way, in 64, as in 4 times 4 times 4, 1964. Now, so there you go. That's the background for the number 4 here in association with Paul Simon, which is again why August 12th was, and this Caribbean cruise sign was 4 days after the other cruise sign that pointed to Paul Simon through the slide, as in slip, slide, and away. Now, so the day before, on August 11th, the Dow closed at 44,044. Quite interesting. The next day, the Dow gained 483 points, which hints at 69 times 7, which is the period of time that's in this most central prophecy in the entire Bible, Daniel chapter 9, 69 weeks, but the weeks are actually not periods of 7 days, they're periods of 7 years. So anyway, that's why 483 is a relevant number here in God's signs. Now, this increase of 483 points, which was a relatively large amount for a one-day gain, was also 1.10%. And that hints at 110. And this was the same day that the Russian troops, 110,000 of them, broke through the wall. Okay? All right. Now, what's with Diana Ross? Well, one thing is that she starred in The Wiz with Michael Jackson. First of all, Michael Jackson has been extremely prophetic in God's signs in general. And so that's just an indicator that this would likely be one way or why God used Diana Ross here with this Royal Caribbean cruise ship sign. And so they starred together in The Wiz. She was Dorothy and he was the Scarecrow. And The Wizard of Oz is also prophetic in God's signs for different reasons. Okay, so let's move on here. There's more to this, right? So here is very interesting here. This is from Wikipedia. It's just a direct copy paste here. 2 days before September 11th, the September 11th attacks, Ross performed God Bless America at the U.S. Open before the tournament's women's final between Venus and Serena Williams. You know what? Williams has 8 letters. And that's interesting given that this is pointing to Revelation chapter 8, this theme here with Paul Simon. Okay. And God Bless America, because this was a judgment warning for America, it was at the U.S. Open, as in the gates opening, judgment coming in type of thing. That's why it was on this performance of Ross's was just 2 days before September 11th. All right. Immediately following the attacks, Ross performed the song again at Shea Stadium before the New York Mets' first game after driving across country to be with her children. In the wake of the attacks, flying in the U.S. was temporarily restricted. Okay, so what we're establishing here is that God is establishing that Diana Ross is associated with the 9/11. That's a huge 9/11 story for for Diana Ross. She drove across the country, and then I guess she probably flew back and didn't drive back also, but she ended up performing on this historic first sports game played in New York City after 9/11. And there's more to that, the details within that particular baseball game as well, as I'll explain in this video. Okay, so, and the thing is that Paul Simon is also associated with 9/11. I'm jumping ahead, but he also performed, oh, I didn't even realize this, wow. All right, in this video, I'm going to explain a number of ways in which Diana Ross connects with Paul Simon. But spontaneously, without realizing it, I just realized arguably the biggest, most important way in which Paul Simon and Diana Ross relate to each other. This is so amazing. Diana Ross, as I'll explain more details, performed at the first professional sports game in New York City after 9/11. Paul Simon performed on the first Saturday Night Live broadcast in New York City after 9/11. That's speechless. Yeah. You'll see, because after everything, because this email thread goes on for quite a while, but after all of that, it's clear that's the main reason here, how they connect, because it's all about the 9/11 warning. Paul Simon's death will be a warning, like I'm explaining, because it'll symbolize the sound of silence in heaven that came before the 7 trumpet judgments, for example. But Paul Simon is connected to the 9/11 events, which were the massive warning for America to repent and turn back to God, or else judgment and destruction. I explained that so many other times, but you know what? Why don't I just play, since you might be new to this channel, I'm going to play a 10-minute clip explaining some details about 9/11 that are really profound and important. And furthermore, it also talks about the number 110, which is part of the signs on this August 12th date. So this is a good point to just pause this video, play a 10-minute clip, and I'll be right back. Jesus' official arrival into Jerusalem and first coming was on the 10th day of the first month in the Hebrew calendar. This is 110, and this hints at the number 110. In the book of Joshua, the date on which the Hebrews crossed over the Jordan River and officially entered the Promised Land was also on the 10th day of the first month, which is 110, and hints at the number 110. Jesus' first coming is symbolized by the number 110. This is why on 9/11, the 2 towers that collapsed were each 110 stories high. The collapse of 2 towers that were 110 floors was symbolism for Jesus' second coming. In the book of Joshua in the Bible, Joshua died at the age of 110. Joshua led the Hebrews around the security walls of the ancient city of Jericho before they collapsed in judgment. On 9/11, the Twin Towers, which were 110 stories high, collapsed, engendering a small earthquake that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall, where George Washington was inaugurated, on Wall Street. President George Washington was a founding father, and his inauguration as the first president was a symbolic founding of the nation. The cracking of the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street on 9/11 symbolized America's foundation in God being cracked. This is because after Washington's inauguration at Federal Hall, he then walked down Wall Street to Trinity Chapel, where he consecrated the nation to God, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its blessings. After 9/11, Trinity Chapel was called the Miracle Chapel, as it was the only building at Ground Zero to have survived. It did not even suffer a broken window due to the 70-year-old sycamore tree that was uprooted as it sheltered the chapel from the falling debris. In commemoration of this sycamore tree outside the chapel, today there is a huge bronze statue of its roots. In other words, through the 9/11 events, God was pointing to Trinity Chapel and Washington's covenantal consecration of the nation to God at Trinity Chapel. Wall Street is named after the original 9-foot-high wall of security that the Dutch built to keep the British and the Indians out. The collapse of 110 floors that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street, which is named after a 9-foot-high security wall, hints at 9/11 and points to Joshua, who died at 110, and the Hebrews that marched around the walls of security before they collapsed in judgment. 110 floors and the 9-foot-high wall of security that was Wall Street points to George Washington's march down Wall Street to Trinity Chapel that symbolized a covenantal relationship between America and God. To this effect, Washington's march down Wall Street with the New York Stock Exchange, the building that symbolizes America's financial strength, located on one side of the street, and Federal Hall, the building that symbolizes America's governmental and institutional strength on the other side, also pointed to the cutting rights ritual practiced in ancient Israel that was used in Abraham's and God's ritual walk in their covenant that is described in Genesis 15. A covenant that symbolizes Washington's walk down Wall Street and his covenantal consecration of the nation to God at Trinity Chapel. There are only two nations in the history of the world that were founded not on ethnicity or territory or language, but were founded solely for God, Israel and America. In every daily Bible that is divided into 365 readings, a portion of the Bible for each day of the year, on every September 11th, everyone that reads this standard 365-day Bible reads the passage in the book of Isaiah, chapter 9, verse 11, which is the judgment warning on ancient Israel, which was a raid on ancient Israel by the world's first recorded terrorists, the ancient Assyrians. And the terrorists on 9/11 were from the same part of the world. The Assyrians raided the northern kingdom of Israel first, and then later the southern kingdom of Judah was destroyed, which is why the terrorists on 9/11 hit the North Tower first, followed 17 minutes later by the South Tower. And this Isaiah 9:11 passage includes a mention of collapsed buildings and uprooted sycamore trees. On the morning after 9/11, Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle gave a speech to the world regarding the events on 9/11. He quoted the passage in Isaiah 9:11, not realizing it was a judgment warning on the ancient Jews. He quoted how, after the raid by the Assyrians, the Hebrews did not repent to God, but instead vowed defiantly to rebuild and become stronger than before. And so, like the ancient Jews, America did not repent after the judgment warning, and instead defied God even more. And so, like ancient Israel, America will now be destroyed. This is why, in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, he frequently pairs together the number 110 and the number 9. Both of these numbers symbolize God's judgment on the nation, and paired together, these numbers point to the big judgment warning that was 9/11. As well, these numbers paired together in God's signs and connections serve as a witness confirmation that the perceived signs and connections are from God. After the judgment warning of 9/11, America was given a period of grace to repent and turn back to God, or else judgment destruction. In the Bible, a 20-year period symbolizes a complete period of waiting. Jacob waited 20 years to get possession of his wives and property. The children of Israel waited 20 years to be freed of Jabin, the king of Canaan, when they were freed from bondage by Deborah and Barak. The Ark of the Covenant waited 20 years in Kiriath-Jearim, and Solomon spent 20 years building his home and the house of God. On the 20th anniversary of the buildings that collapsed on 9/11 was the sudden collapse of America's presence in Afghanistan, and the iconic scene of this was the U.S. Air Force plane leaving the airport in Afghanistan, and the big number on the side of its plane is 1109, which hints at 110 and 9. Okay, now to finish this part up here, Paul Simon also performed at the 10-year anniversary at the 9/11 memorial. Okay, and also, as this paragraph from Wikipedia says, Ross teamed with legendary singers Patti LaBelle and Eartha Kitt, among others, for a Nile Rodgers-produced recording of Sister Sledge's classic disco hit, We Are Family, recorded to benefit the families of 9/11 victims. Okay. So she was involved in a charity for 9/11 as well. But this is so huge. Now I'm going to explain more about even this first game that was played in New York City. And that's relevant. In other words, God's pointing to this first game through this Diana Ross sign right here as it connects with Paul Simon, who is also associated with 9/11. And furthermore, New York City, but specifically 9/11. Paul Simon is, of course, from New York City. He's a big, for that matter, a baseball fan of New York City Yankees, and on and on. So, okay, that's it for this segment, this paragraph here. Oh, okay, another way in which Diana Ross relates to Paul Simon is, again, as I mentioned, Paul Simon is associated with the, in his signs, the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing, because that's what triggers the demonic possession that's described in the fifth trumpet. When the demons cross over the bridge, as in bridge over troubled water, into the earthly realm. And that's a result, again, of taking the mark of the Antichrist. The demons will possess those who have taken it. Michael Jackson, in God's Signs, is symbolism for this, because he, of course, died from having taken a thing. Okay, there's more proof to that's what, in fact, God points to with Michael Jackson, one of the things about Michael Jackson. And Diana Ross is well known for being friends with Michael Jackson. Furthermore, they both starred in this movie, The Wiz, which was a remake of The Wizard of Oz. And Diana Ross starred as Dorothy, and Michael Jackson was the Scarecrow. The thing about The Wizard of Oz is that also hints at Seattle, which is where the Space Needle is. Because the Wizard of Oz, the capital of Oz, is Emerald City, and the nickname of Seattle is Emerald City. And again, Paul Simon's last concert was in Seattle, near the Space Needle, which is symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist, as I explained. Now, as I wrote here, if we can conclude that Ross is symbolism for the Wiz, which of course she is, and I think we can conclude, not if, I think we conclude that Ross is symbolism for the Wiz and therefore the Space Needle, because of, again, what I just explained, Emerald City. And I believe also in the movie, in The Wizard of Oz, Oz and the Wizard of Oz are seen to be technologically advanced. And that's more symbolism for like transhumanism technology. And furthermore, Oz is symbolism for attempt to reach heaven with technology without God, which is transhumanism technology. This is also the symbolism in the story of the Tower of Babel in the Bible. In Babel, they tried to build a tower with technology to reach heaven without God, and were judged for this. Now, The Wizard of Oz is about Kansas, especially Dorothy. The character Dorothy, of course, is from Kansas, and she is trying to get back to Kansas. She gets swept away in a tornado in Kansas and then is dropped into, I guess, not the land of Oz, but in the other world. And she's trying to get back to Kansas. So Kansas is a part of the plot of the movie The Wizard of Oz, especially through its main character, Dorothy. Now, Kansas is the 34th state, which hints at one of the reasons I explained earlier why God is, or how it is that God is using Paul Simon, and that is for this idiom here, for 3 transgressions and for 4. Again, Paul Simon and Garfunkel's first album was named Wednesday Morning 3 a.m., which was a 3 and a 4 because Wednesday was the 4th day of the week. So this is amazing here. Now, this here was not realized until today because it was only recently recognized the significance of this idiom that's in the book of Amos, chapter 1. So this is what I mentioned at the beginning of this video. God uses these stories through connecting these signs and through the connection of these signs to convey extremely important, profound knowledge. This wouldn't have been possible without God's big picture of science that a few weeks ago revealed how, through, for example, like I explained, the death of Wally Amos, Paul Simon points to the book of Amos, and specifically the first chapter with its verses that repeat this idiom of for 3 transgressions and for 4, which hints at the number 34. This was just realized today because of Kansas. I realized, well, Kansas is the 34th state. Wait a second, that's a for 3 transgressions and for 4 hint. And that's Paul Simon. And so again, this is another way in which actually Diana Ross connects with Paul Simon. So again, prior to August 12th, we were expecting a Paul Simon sign, and here we have this Diana Ross sign, but it was on the same Caribbean cruise line company ship that was the other Paul Simon sign 4 days earlier, the slip, slide, and away sign. Anyway, so Diana Ross was Dorothy in the movie Wizard of Oz, which is about Kansas, especially through Dorothy, and it's the 34th state, and Paul Simon is symbolism for 3 transgressions and for 4. Okay, but this was just realized today, and this is so profound and so important because it's, again, part of this overarching theme of 9/11 in God's signs. So as I said, whoa, exclamation mark. 34 symbolizes for 3 transgressions and for 4, which is why the Dow gained 0.34 points the day before 9/11. Okay, so the Dow never opened on 9/11, but the prior day, on Monday, it closed just 0.34 points above the Friday close. Both of those closes, by the way, were 9,611. That hinted at 9/11, because 9,605. The 6 plus 5 hints at 11, so you have the 9 and 11 there in the number. That's why the 0.34 difference between those two closes before 9/11. But now we know why 34. Now, I had already known that the 34 was in itself a hint at the 2 planes that struck the 2 towers 17 minutes apart, because 2 times 17 equals 34. So I had already known that was the reason for the World Trade Center collapsing after the Dow gained 0.34 points. Also, Isaiah chapter 34 is the chapter in the Bible that is regarding the judgment on the world, hence the World Trade Center. And I had already known this. The 44th president lived for 4 years in Indonesia, which has 34 provinces. But now I know the bigger reason for this 34, and including the reason why 2 planes 17 minutes apart, really. It's because of this 3 transgressions and for 4 idiom, which again means the tolerable limit of transgressions has been exceeded, and now judgment is unavoidable and destruction, which was the warning on 9/11. That was what this warning of the events of 9/11 was. It was a for 3 transgressions and for 4 warning, which is why the 2 planes 17 minutes apart, because 2 times 17 equals 34. Okay, and again, the number of the Dow, which hinted at 9/11 in itself, was a gain of 0.34 points. Okay, now to be fair, the Wiz isn't in Kansas, but in Harlem. That's the, modern, if you will, take on the Wizard of Oz that Diana Ross and Michael Jackson starred in. The character Dorothy begins her journey from Harlem, New York City, which, by the way, ties to Paul Simon, because, again, Paul Simon is from New York City. Okay, and we already explained how both of them performed immediately following 9/11, which is the major point here. Nonetheless, it still hints at Kansas. Okay, yes. No. And Ross is part of the 9/11 story. In this 9/11 story about Ross, she drove across the country and therefore drove through Kansas. Okay, so again, I read from the paragraph from Wikipedia. After 9/11, or right before 9/11, she was in New York City performing for the US Open. And then following 9/11, she drove across the country because there were no flights. She wanted to see her children. She drove to Los Angeles, where she lives. And then, right after 9/11, again, still, she came back to New York City and performed at the first game, and God uses firsts for signs, first sports game in New York City after 9/11. When she sang, what did she sing? I know she said God Bless America to begin the US Open. I don't know what. She probably just would have sang the national anthem, maybe? I don't know. Again, I suppose also God Bless America is a national anthem, but whatever. She performed, she came back. Anyway, but the point here I'm making right here, though, is that this connects to Kansas. Because if you go to Google Maps and you plot in a journey from New York City to Los Angeles, one of the routes goes through Kansas. Whether it goes through Kansas literally or not, whether she went through Kansas literally or not is irrelevant, because even still, either of the other 2 paths would have passed right by Kansas, and Kansas is simply symbolism for the heart of America anyway, and symbolism for America, therefore. And that's what I'm getting at, actually, because that's what I'm saying here. Her drive across the country after 9/11 and then return to New York City for the Mets game hints at Kansas. Okay, one of the 3 routes on the maps, Google Maps suggests that it suggests going through Kansas. But the point here is that this Kansas in itself is symbolism for the heart of America. She drove across America. She starred in the movie in which it pointed to Kansas, which symbolizes America because it's in the center of America. In fact, the nickname of Kansas City is the heart of America. That's one of the nicknames for that particular city. But likewise, the state of Kansas is thought of as being the center of America, but in symbolic terms, it is. the heart of America. And anyway, she drove across America, which makes, if she's relevant to the 9/11 sign, which she is, because, like I'm saying, she performed right before and after at the first game after 9/11 in New York City. So she in itself is symbolism, or is part of the 9/11 sign, which was not known until today. I mean, you would think that, I don't even know what I'm trying to say. But, I've been studying this for long enough, and I know so many things about 9/11, but this was a new one. Diana Ross. I did not know that Diana Ross was a major part of the 9/11 sign. And part of that sign is that she drove across America, which in turn, which made her point to America. In other words, through her driving across America and then returning, God used that to point to America and not just New York City for the judgment, is what I'm saying. And again, it's confirmed also because she starred in the movie which pointed to Kansas. I think somehow God used this drive to indicate that the events of 9/11 in New York City were a warning for all of America, which is what I just explained. If true, this means Ross is supremely important. Pun intended. Now, of course, Diana Ross is known for being the lead singer of the Supremes. And if we put it this way, she was a supreme. In other words, symbolism for God. That's why she was part of the Supremes. God is using her as a sign through her journey across America, both ways, after 9/11. So she is a supreme, as in God is behind her as a prophetic sign. Okay. Now, is her drive in any way symbolic of the woman riding the beast? That's just a thought that I had. Let's see. Now, she is the queen of Motown Records. Detroit, Motown, Motor City equals drive across the country. Okay, so she drove across the country in a car. What city is symbolized by cars? Motor City. Not so much today as it was in the past, especially when, at the time that Diana Ross was born and grew up and became the queen of Motown Records. Okay, and that's important too. She's the queen. Oh, you know what? Paul Simon has a queen, and it's about New York City, the Queen of Corona. Me and Julio down by the schoolyard. The chorus involves the Queen of Corona. And Diana Ross, who is also symbolism for 9/11, was the queen of Motown Records. But she's from Detroit, again, like I'm saying, which is Motor City, and that's why Motown Records, the name, and she's the queen of Motown Records. And her use as a prophetic sign in the 9/11 events was her drive in a car across the country. Oh, she was also in a DUI, which would have been while she was driving. Now, this link that I sent to my friend is a video about a short documentary about the significance of the first New York Mets baseball game after 9/11, which is the game she performed for. And so this was a huge moment, not only in New York history, but American history. And she's a part of that. And that game, the big moment in the game, was the home run. It was a huge release for the New Yorkers at the time. It was an emotional release. There's, for example, in the documentary, a woman with her 2 or 3 sons. Her husband died in the 9/11 collapse of the towers, was a fireman. In the documentary, she thought her sons would never be happy ever again or something. And then they were when the home run was hit. And the stadium erupted, like overreacted to the home run, right? It was late in the game, in the 8th inning. The Mets were down 1 run. It was 2-1. And this player, Mike Piazza, hit a 2-run home run to put the Mets ahead 3-2, and then the game ended at 3-2. It was the game-winning home run. Okay, this was a huge moment. I just repeat it. The fans were overreacting with joy. Okay, now it was, by the way, in the 8th inning. Well, I'm jumping ahead because I am sure I write that later. Now, my friend points out that Mike Piazza hints at pizza, and of course, I realize that it sounds like pizza, but this is actually prophetic, as I'll explain in a second. And important. Okay, so he wears number 31. Which hints at Diana Ross's drive across the country to the 31st state. And I wrote perhaps as a stretch, but it definitely isn't, because of, after contemplating everything after these emails were originally written, this is definitely true. This is definitely accurate. He is number 31, and Diana Ross performed to begin the game, and prior to the game, she had just returned from the 31st state after driving to the 31st state. Okay. Like I said, number 31 is symbolic of the drive to the 31st state. Furthermore, it was a home run. She drove home. And it was a ball hit long. It went over practically the center field. It was a long home run. The story is how she drove a long distance to her home, as in home run, in the 31st state, as in player number 31, Mike Piazza. Piazza hit a long home run. That also hints at a long drive home for Diana Ross. Kansas equals the 31st state. Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. That's the 4th day of the week. So it's like I explained this earlier. Okay, and now Simon. And Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. is the name of Simon and Garfunkel's first album. Is 9/11 symbolism, because again he performed right after. For the Saturday Night Live broadcast, the first one. And Ross has this 9/11 story, but to be more precise, she performed also in the first sports game after 9/11. Like Simon performed at the first Saturday Night Live broadcast. And Simon also performed at the 10-year memorial anniversary, etc. Okay, now, Mike Piazza played for 3 California teams. He started his career in Los Angeles, which is more confirmation that his home run hints at Diana Ross's drive to Los Angeles in the 31st state. And then his career ended with 2 teams in Los Angeles. He began his career in Los Angeles, and his last 2 teams were in the 31st state. Okay, as I just mentioned. Okay, now Paul Simon, as my friend pointed out, reminded me that is associated in God's signs with baseball. This is a big thing. Paul Simon is definitely associated with baseball signs. There are baseball signs related to Paul Simon. What I'm saying? Paul Simon sang in Yankee Stadium to open the season in 1999, I think, and that was just after the death of Joe DiMaggio. Because Paul Simon is widely known for being a big New York Yankees fan. Okay, he's from New York City. And so we have a baseball sign, a New York baseball sign with Diana Ross. In other words, this is another way in which Diana Ross parallels or connects to Paul Simon. Again, prior to August 12th, we were expecting a Paul Simon sign, and we received another Royal Caribbean sign involving Diana Ross, which connected with the other Royal Caribbean Cruise Line sign, which was the slip side and away sign, which pointed to Paul Simon. So in other words, I'm just establishing here that indeed Diana Ross connects with Paul Simon. And that's why we received a Diana Ross prophetic sign on August 12th. Okay. My friend discovered, amazingly, that the home run that was hit, this prophetic home run after 9/11, at the game that Diana Ross performed at, was the 34th home run for this player for the season. we double check. I mean, it's not, he's pretty sure. It was the 34th home run, okay? And that's amazing because, again, this is 9/11. Now we know that 34 hints at 9/11. Two planes 17 minutes apart, we already knew that actually, that 34 was a 9/11 number. But now we know this game was a big 9/11 sign. I wasn't even aware of this game until today, learning about this through Diana Ross. And but now we also know that it's about Diana Ross through the state of Kansas. Anyway, so okay, this is an amazing realization here. So the home run was hit in the 8th inning. The game in which Diana Ross sang was 880 days after Paul Simon sang before the game in Yankee Stadium. That's 888. The name Jesus in Greek, because the New Testament is written in Greek, is 888 in Greek gematria. The name is equivalent to 888. 8 being symbolism for a new beginning. And that's Jesus. So, but the home run was hit in the 8th inning, and Diana Ross sang 888 days after Paul Simon sang in a baseball stadium. And at the game that Diana Ross sang at, the home run, the big moment of the game, was in the 8th inning, which confirms 888. You could also look at it this way too. 880 is 9/11 symbolism because 880 is 8 times 110. And on 9/11, 110 stories collapsed. But in the story of that is the heroes of the 88th floor. Also, the Tribute in Light art installation that commemorated the Twin Towers was made up of 88 searchlights. And also, through the 9/11 events, God pointed to George Washington, and according to Wikipedia, there are 88 places in America named Washington. Now, the historic home run was 10 days after 9/11 and in the 8th inning. Simon's mansion sold for $10.8 million. Perhaps there is something to this. Well, there certainly is. Now, one of the big signs that God used with Paul Simon was the sale of his mansion in Connecticut before he moved to Texas with his wife, Edie Brickell, who is from Texas. The story was a story in the news at the time, in 2022, because the couple had to reduce the price for their mansion a couple of times. At one point, it was listed for $11.9 million, which obviously was a 9/11 sign. Then it was reduced to $10.8 million. That, I believe, also hints at Revelation 8:1, which is Paul Simon, because of the sound of silence in Revelation 8:1. Again, that's also why the 8th inning home run, because of Revelation chapter 8. And so God is using here Diana Ross to point to Paul Simon on August 12th, and Diana Ross is all about this game in which the home run was hit in the 8th inning, so that's Revelation 8 and the sound of silence, but Revelation 8:1. But the thing is, too, is that this 8th inning home run was hit 10 days after 9/11, and the mansion sold for $10.8 million. Now, the reason for the mansion symbolism in God's signs is because of the Graceland Mansion album and Elvis Presley's mansion, and ultimately also the White House mansion, in which the Antichrist will dwell. Now, much more regarding this theme of mansion is explained in the other videos. And so also, Simon's mansion, although in Connecticut, is arguably in the New York City region. Okay? This is part of the progressive understanding of this sign here. We now see that we have a home run in the 10 days after 9/11, the 8th inning, which hints at Paul Simon's home, which sold for $10.8 million. And his home is in New York City, arguably. Now, home run equals Simon's home. That was another thing. Not even a question mark anymore. We'll block that out, okay? It's definitely what's going on here. The home run hinted at Paul Simon's home. Because, again, it was 10 days and in the 8th inning, and Simon's home sold for $10.8 million. In fact, I'm saying this now, but Simon's home sold for $10.8 million after the 10 days in the 8th inning home run. I'm just learning about this now because of Diana Ross, though. Okay, now the Paul Simon mansion sign involves Richard Gere, because Richard Gere is the person who finally bought the mansion from Paul Simon and Edie Brickell. It turns out that we are expecting now that Paul Simon will die on August 31st, and that'll be Richard Gere's birthday. How about that? He will turn 76. So what's the significance of 76? Well, it's this. 76 is the 4th plus 4th prime number times 4. And God repeats the number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning. And I've already explained the significance of the number 4 associated with Paul Simon. Okay, so that's why Richard Gere, who bought Paul Simon's mansion, will die on the date it's predicted that Paul Simon will die. And again, he'll be dying at 76, which is 19 times 4, and 19 is the 4th plus 4th prime number. Now, August 12th is also 4 plus 4th prime number of days before August 31st. Number 31 hints at the date 8/31, 8th prime number of days after the Ross sign. Okay, so that's another way in which all of the Diana Ross sign reveals the date Paul Simon will die. Okay, because it's the 8th prime number of days after August 12th, the Diana Ross sign. And the sign points to number 31, and the date Paul Simon's predicted to die is 8/31. And again, number 31 hit the home run in the 8th inning. Did I even write that in the paragraph here? I didn't even write that. What am I even thinking? That's like the biggest thing that's here. Diana Ross, God used Diana Ross here through the parallels of 9/11 with Paul Simon, the first SNL broadcast, the first sports game. But the sports game was about number 31's home run in the 8th inning. That's 8/31. Gere, who will turn 4th plus 4th prime number times 4 years old on August 31st, starred in Chicago, which hints at the 44th president, who is from Chicago. God uses these Chicago signs to point to the 44th president. And so Richard Gere, who starred in Chicago, will give us this 3 4s here. And God again repeats the number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning. Amazing. And again, Paul Simon is associated with the number 4 in God's signs. Another thing that I just randomly realized here in the moment is that this Diana Ross sign points to player number 31's home run. 31 is the 11th prime number, and this August 12th date with this Diana Ross sign was known ahead of time. The date, August 12th, was known ahead of time because of the 11 days after the sale of the $110 million mansion on August 1st, as I explained earlier. So that's something interesting too. Now, A Pretty Woman, Richard Gere is also known for A Pretty Woman, which stars Julia Roberts. Julia Roberts is, I believe it's her first movie, and God uses firsts for signs. Let me just double check. Okay, I don't know if it was her very first movie or not, but it was one of her firsts. Julia Roberts starred in this movie, Mystic Pizza, which hints at Piazza. Okay, again, we have Richard Gere tied into this because he bought the mansion. Piazza's home run pointed to Simon's home, as I just explained. And that home is in Connecticut. And the movie Mystic Pizza takes place in Connecticut. And that's like a part of the movie. The movie takes place in Mystic, Connecticut. That's why the name Mystic Pizza. So it's not just trivial that the movie is in Connecticut. It's part of the plot. And she starred in this movie, and she starred with Richard Gere, and Richard Gere is part of this mansion sign that's in Connecticut. So this is all relevant. Okay, and it's Mystic Pizza, which is why the name Piazza. That's why, prophetically, the name Piazza. It's to confirm Richard Gere, a part of all this, and the mansion is all part of this. It's to confirm that Piazza's home run hinted at Simon's home run near Mystic, Connecticut, in other words. in this movie Mystic Pizza through Richard Gere. It's just amazing, right? Now, Julia Roberts was born 44 weeks and 4 days before Mike Piazza. That's just amazing. More confirmation. That's a 3 4s again. This is also 312 days. And that home run was his 312th total home run of his career. The prophetic home run was his 312th of his career. And 44 weeks and 4 days, which is 312 days before Piazza, who hit his 312th home run, was the birth of Julia Roberts. Amazing. Mystic Pizza came out on October 12th, 1998, which is 155 months before Piazza's home run, and Diana Ross singing on 9/21 in 2001. 155 is the 18th super semi-prime number. And God uses semi-prime numbers, a number that is only divisible by 2 other prime numbers. And 18 is 6 plus 6 plus 6, which is the number of the Antichrist. But more to that as I elaborate here, 155 is also symbolism for the I-55 in this song Graceland. And because the song Graceland, well, first of all, Memphis is connected with the I-55 to Chicago, ultimately, and also New Orleans. In the song Graceland, Paul Simon is traveling probably from New Orleans down the highway, the I-55. Okay, there's more reason because the most evil ruler in Israel's history was King Manasseh, who ruled for 55 years. And the mansion, the Graceland mansion, the king of rock and roll's mansion, is symbolic of a king's palace. And so that's why, too, and that's why it connects to Chicago, the most evil president in history, through the I-55. Because of the most evil king having ruled for 55 years. Okay, and it's okay. So that's why the 155 connection here between the Mystic Pizza movie and Diana and Piazza's home run that hinted at Paul Simon's home in Connecticut, where Mystic Pizza is. Okay, exactly 155 months. Okay, and also the Antichrist king, as in the king. I-55 mansion, Paul Simon, Graceland, 666, 18. Okay, Simon and Ross, Harlem The Wiz, 9/11 game. So Ross, both of them equal New York City. I've already established this. This is probably, what I established earlier was after this was written right here, kind of thing. All coming together, right? But just again, both of them, Paul Simon and Diana Ross, both symbolize New York City. Simon is, of course, from New York City. And, of course, he's associated with New York City because he's a Yankees fan and sang at the Saturday Night Live broadcast after 9/11 and the 9/11 memorial, etc. And Ross, New York City, too, because of her starring in The Wiz, which takes place in Harlem, and the 9/11 game that I'm just talking about in this video. Now, the big news regarding New York City on August 12th is the poll. So this is the date we were expecting a Paul Simon sign. Paul Simon's associated with New York City, as is Ross, and we received a Diana Ross sign on August 12th. But another story on the August 12th date here is this shock poll result that's on one of the main stories of the day, showing a 19-point lead for the socialist Zoran Mamdani. This confirms the 19 days from August 12th to August 31st and the predicted death of Paul Simon, who is from New York City. Oh, by the way, he's from New York City and has a song singing about the Queen of Corona, an area of New York City or an area of Queens or something. And Diana Ross is the Queen of Motown. Now, Diana Ross is born 5 years, 5 months, and 5 days before Richard Gere. Connecticut is the 5th state. My friend doesn't realize how this is significant, because it is. Okay, August 31st will be, Simon's predicted death will be 555 days after the basketball sign involving this player named Wembanyama. Obama is the basketball president. This player Wembanyama that God is using in his signs in general plays for San Antonio, which is right near where Paul Simon currently lives. And on this day, which was, by the way, February 23rd, 2024, he had a 5-5-5 game. Now, I'm not a big basketball fan, but what this means, I forget the details, but it means he scored at least 5 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists or something. He got in the categories, 3 of them, a total of 5. So it was a 5-5-5 game. And from what I understand, it's very rare. Sorry, I don't know the details of how that works, but it was a 5-5-5 game. It was a news story. He had a 5-5-5 game, okay? Now the thing is too, on this same day of the 5-5-5 game, which will be 555 days before August 31st, was the day of the news story of the death of this famous owl in Central Park named Flacco. This owl escaped the Central Park Zoo and lived for many months in Central Park and became a tourist attraction. People would seek the owl out to watch it and stuff. So this owl became famous. And then one day, as was probably expected, he tragically flew into a tower during the night, which was symbolic of 9/11. He flew into the tower and crashed and died. This owl, okay? Now, Paul Simon's new album depicts owls on its cover. This album, Paul Simon received a prophetic dream instructing him to make the album. Okay? Now, this Flacco owl sign and the Wembanyama 5-5-5 game was 5 + 5 + 5 days after player number 5 + 5 + 5, in other words 15, was awarded at a ceremony in Las Vegas before the Super Bowl the award for Comeback Player of the Year. And his name was Flacco, Joe Flacco. And he played for a team named Ravens. He played in the Super Bowl previously for a team that was a bird. We're talking about an owl that crashed. Okay, anyway, Flacco, Comeback Player of the Year, also, by the way, hints at the comeback of the Antichrist, Barack Obama, to the White House mansion, I should say, White House mansion, as in Paul Simon, Graceland mansion. So the Comeback Player of the Year, player 5 + 5 + 5, named Flacco, got his award 5 + 5 + 5 days before the death of the owl named Flacco on the day of the Wembanyama 5-5-5 game, which is 555 days before the predicted death of Paul Simon. And again, Paul Simon is hinted at with the Flacco owl. And oh, by the way, that's because of the very, very prophetic concert in Central Park that Paul Simon performed with Art Garfunkel, the prophetic reunion concert. And then later, himself solo, Paul Simon did another massive concert. But at the time, I believe the reunion concert was the record, and maybe even Paul Simon's concert later broke that record or something. But he's famous for these 2 massive free concerts in Central Park, Paul Simon. And that's why the owl named Flacco died in that park 555 days before Paul Simon's predicted to die. And again, his new album, 7 Psalms, which depicts owls on its cover, its theme is of passing over into the afterlife. Okay? And so again, that's why my friend's connection here is relevant. So Diana Ross was born 5 years, 5 months, and 5 days before Richard Gere, who bought the mansion in the 5th state. Mamdani, this politician, is an anagram for madman, which hints at the Antichrist, 666, but also the coming demonic possession in the 5th trumpet judgment that lasts for 5 months, as described. Because demonically possessed people will be madmen. 55 is the 19th semi-prime number. 19 days after August 31st, which hints at the home run and the 5th state mansion, and 5 + 5, 5 years, 5 months, 5 days before the birth, or after the birth of Ross, like I just explained, driving home, and Ross equals driving home, and that equals Simon's drive. I didn't get this parallel established yet. Her drive across the nation, and by the way, near the center of the country, near Memphis, Tennessee, where Paul Simon was driving to in his song, Graceland. And again, she performed at the game that pointed to the mansion through Piazza's home run. And Paul Simon's drive in his song, because he sings about driving in the song, is pointing to the mansion, the Graceland mansion, which, by the way, sits on the 5th semi-prime number of acres. And the White House mansion is on 5 acres, incidentally. Okay, and lastly, something that I just, like I mentioned earlier, I just realized while I was recording. I think another most obvious thing here is that in the 8th inning, number 31 hit the prophetic home run, which hints at the date 8/31. And that is it for this video, I think. So, again, all of this reveals that God did point to August 12th for Paul Simon. We got the signs that I just explained, including Diana Ross, and it revealed adding 19 days, the eighth prime number of days. It's all about Revelation chapter 8, but also 8 is 4 plus 4. Paul Simon is associated with 44. The 44th president will live in the White House mansion, and on and on. So we get this confirmation, but again, Diana Ross ultimately points to this 9/11 connection, which parallels Paul Simon's 9/11 connections. And her connection to 9/11 gives us the 8th inning home run by number 31, which just confirms again that Paul Simon is predicted to die on the date 8/31. On August 12th, the Los Angeles Dodgers played the Los Angeles Angels. Speaking of baseball signs and Diana Ross drove to Los Angeles after 9/11. And then she returned for a baseball game after 9/11. Ohtani hit into a triple play on this day. And God is using Ohtani in general. God is using Ohtani for prophetic signs, big time. And they point to Obama. Ohtani hints at Obama. And it was the 8th triple play in Los Angeles Angels history. Paul Simon, a baseball fan, widely known baseball fan, is predicted to die the 8th prime number of days after the Ross sign and 8th triple play sign. Again, Ross lives in Los Angeles, drove to Los Angeles, returned for a baseball game after 9/11. And we have this baseball sign, this 8th triple play in Los Angeles. This is a unique game because both of these teams are from Los Angeles, and they don't normally play each other in a season. Once every few years, because they're in the different leagues. The Los Angeles Angels are in the American League and the Dodgers are in the National League, and so every now and then they play each other, but not every year, from what I understand. I mean, I could be wrong. I don't know for sure, but they don't regularly play each other, and but here we have both teams from Los Angeles playing each other on the same day as the Diana Ross sign. And her sign involves her drive to Los Angeles, where she lives. And so anyway, this confirms the 8th prime number of days connection to the predicted death of Paul Simon, which will point to Revelation chapter 8 and the sound of silence in heaven. You know what? You could also interpret Ohtani's reaction after hitting into the triple play as somewhat symbolic of a sound of silence. I mean, just like dismay. Anyway, yeah. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Do not listen to or follow the example of most quote-unquote Christians. Instead, follow the teachings of Jesus, which most quote-unquote Christians ignore. Like Jesus, you must surrender your life. Put nothing ahead of Jesus, your Lord. Like Jesus, you must lay down your life so that you may live. As Jesus said, one must die first, like a kernel of wheat going into the ground, in order to then grow and produce fruit. And like Jesus said, one must produce fruit, or else like a branch or a tree not producing fruit, they will be thrown into the fire. Jesus was speaking to quote-unquote Christians when he said this. One must die the self in order to be born again. And like Jesus said, one must be born again to enter the kingdom. Like Jesus, you must sacrifice your life for the sake of the coming kingdom. It means to do work that involves some form of sacrifice and risk. To have faith does not mean to intellectually agree. You need to demonstrate your faith through taking action. To have faith means to trust in God's promises. Taking action demonstrates trust and fear of the Lord. The primary reason that the wrath of God is coming upon America is quote-unquote Christians that do not get what I have just explained. The only reason a Christian is alive is in order to help other people become Christians and make it to the kingdom. Do not be deceived by those on the political left claiming to be quote-unquote Christians. There is no such thing as a Christian on today's political progressive left. Jesus said, "Do not think I have come to abolish or change any bit of the law or the prophets of the Old Testament Bible." In other words, the God of the Old Testament Bible is the exact same God of the New Testament Bible. It is essential that you learn about the God of the Bible and his ways. The God of the Old Testament Bible is looking to see who will fear him, and to fear God is not the same thing as quote-unquote revering or honoring God. Through Christ's ransom payment, a Christian is someone who has been redeemed and freed from slavery to sin and Satan. In response, a true Christian recognizes that their life in this world does not belong to them, and they become a willing slave to Jesus for the sake of the kingdom. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. And don't only put the link to this video or another video on this channel in comments sections of places you typically visit. But importantly, put the link to the video in places you never visit, where people who don't think like you visit. If you are a quote-unquote Christian, nothing in terms of an evangelism tool compares to this video with its prediction. It is a massive bag of gold. Beware of Jesus' warning through the quote-unquote Christian that did nothing with his bag of gold and was banished to hell. Also, read Ezekiel chapter 3 and 33 for this same warning. If you think you might be spending too much time watching videos instead of working and sacrificing for the kingdom through handing out flyers and potentially helping hundreds of people in the same length of time as a video, my flyer is filled with amazing information that people need to know right now, and it points people to the video channel. Now is not the time to be handing out typical evangelical tracts that are largely based in error anyway, such as, quote, Jesus loves you, unquote, for example. You can hand out the flyer on busy street corners, put them on car windshields in busy parking lots, and put them in mailboxes. Just send the file to your local print shop. You can download the file from the website. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, asteroidprediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odyssey.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.